Look closely at the deep ravines of the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. In 1865, the Central Pacific Railroad supposedly conquered this impossible topography, driving a transcontinental rail line through solid granite and bottomless gorges. The official historical ledger presents a narrative of raw, unmechanized human willpower. To prove this, mainstream historians proudly point to the Secret Town Trestle. We are instructed to believe that an unmechanized workforce, armed with nothing but handsaws, iron axes, and hemp ropes, assembled a colossal wooden bridge spanning 1,100 feet across a mountain chasm. It stood 90 feet in the air. A monumental structural matrix, supposedly mechanically hoisted into place and secured with pinpoint geometric precision, utilizing only primitive biological kinetic energy. At the Titanmetrics Audit Desk, we do not evaluate romantic folklore, we audit structural physics, and the physics of the Secret Town Assembly are a mathematical fiction. But the true anomaly is not how they built it. The anomaly is how they buried it. Today, modern trains still cross the Secret Town Gorge, but there is no bridge visible. The entire structure was swallowed by millions of tons of earth, systematically entombed by the very corporation that claimed to build it. Welcome to the audit. Let us open the file on the burial protocol.
To understand the scale of the corporate deception, we must first isolate the physical and aerodynamic parameters of the Secret Town matrix. A heavy rail wooden trestle of this magnitude is not a simple scaffold. It is a highly complex, precision-set, load-bearing grid designed to absorb the massive dynamic kinetic shock of multi-ton steam locomotives braking and accelerating. Let us establish the dimensions. 1,100 feet in length, or 335 meters. 90 feet, or 27 meters, in vertical height. To maintain structural integrity under the shifting weight of a moving train, the massive timber columns must be perfectly plumb. The cross-bracing must be tensioned with millimeter accuracy to prevent catastrophic lateral sway. The official narrative insists this flawless geometry was achieved using gin poles, primitive wooden A-frames with hand-cranked pulleys. Let us run the physics of that unmechanized operation. The Sierra Nevada gorges act as natural geographic wind tunnels. At an elevation of several thousand feet, unpredictable thermal crosswinds routinely exceed 40 miles per hour, or 64 kilometers per hour. If you attempt to manually hoist a massive 2-ton raw timber column 90 feet into the air using hemp ropes and wooden pulleys, the load instantly catches the crosswind. It becomes a massive, uncontrollable pendulum. Biological operators standing in the mud cannot stabilize a swaying 4,000-pound mass of timber without heavy hydraulic anchors and mechanized stabilization taglines. When a 2-ton pendulum swings out of alignment, the kinetic torque translates directly down the ropes. It shatters wooden pulleys, snaps hemp lines, and violently drags the human operators over the edge of the cliff. You do not assemble a precision-set matrix of this scale in an alpine wind tunnel without heavy industrial cranes and advanced pneumatic deployment.
When confronted with these unbreakable laws of aerodynamics and kinetic torque, mainstream historians deploy their ultimate shield. They invoke the sheer volume of imported human capital. The Central Pacific Railroad famously imported over 12,000 Chinese laborers to conquer the Sierra Nevada. The official ledger expects us to believe that sheer biological numbers simply overrode the laws of physics. Let us audit the thermodynamics of that human capital. Biological units, regardless of their sheer numbers, are restricted by the spatial limitations of a work zone. You cannot fit 500 men around the base of a single wooden column to push it upward. The deployment of an unmechanized workforce is subject to the law of diminishing returns. There is a strict spatial boundary to how many human engines can safely apply upward kinetic force in a 90-foot chasm before they physically obstruct one another. Furthermore, we must audit the raw material processing. To construct the Secret Town matrix requires an estimated 1.5 million board feet of heavy timber. You do not fell, transport, and precision mill this volume of old-growth mountain pine using hand saws and horse-drawn sleds in a wilderness completely devoid of industrial steam mills. A wooden bridge spanning 1,100 feet requires tens of thousands of heavy iron bolts, washers, and tension rods to hold the matrix together. These bolts must be driven through multiple layers of dense timber with extreme force and tightened to precise torque specifications. If the bolts are loose by a fraction of an inch, the vibration of a moving steam train will pull the iron through the wood in a matter of weeks. You do not achieve uniform industrial-grade mechanical torque across tens of thousands of bolts using freezing, exhausted men turning primitive hand wrenches while dangling 90 feet in the air. The human capital narrative is a logistical fiction. The robber barons did not conquer the Sierra Nevada with hand saws and cheap labor. The workforce depicted in the archival photographs did not construct the Secret Town Trestle. They merely adapted a pre-existing, highly advanced modular system, or they were utilized as a biological cover for suppressed Phase 2 industrial mechanization.
The impossibility of the assembly is mathematically clear, but the corporate elites made a critical error in their logistics. They possessed a structure they claimed to have built by hand, which overtly displayed the hallmarks of advanced mechanization. They had to conceal the matrix. Only a few years after the transcontinental line was opened, the Central Pacific Railroad initiated an unprecedented and highly irrational engineering operation. The corporation abruptly announced that the Secret Town Trestle was a fire hazard, and that it was structurally insufficient to support the weight of newer, heavier locomotives. Standard civil engineering protocol in the late 19th century dictates a clear, logical sequence. You halt traffic, you dismantle the unsafe wooden structure, and you construct a reinforced steel or stone bridge in its place. The Central Pacific did not dismantle the bridge. Instead, they initiated a massive, multi-year earth-moving campaign. They brought in hundreds of freight trains and began dumping dirt, rock, and crushed granite directly into the gorge, right through the gaps of the wooden bridge. They dumped millions of tons of earth, systematically burying the 1,100-foot structure alive. They continued this operation until the entire 90-foot deep canyon was completely filled to the brim, transforming the wooden bridge into a solid, artificial earthen mound. Mainstream historians wave this away as a brilliant pragmatic solution. They call it a trench fill. Let us audit the mathematics of that pragmatism. We must calculate the volumetric footprint of the Secret Town Gorge, a trench that is 1,100 feet long, 90 feet deep at the center, and approximately 40 feet wide at the crest. Accounting for the sloping angle of repose required to prevent landslides, the total volume of compacted earth required to fill this void is conservatively estimated at 250,000 cubic yards, or 191,000 cubic meters. We must convert that volume into mass. A single cubic yard of compacted Sierra Mountain rock and wet soil weighs approximately 1.3 tons. The Central Pacific Railroad deliberately chose to excavate,
transport, and dump over 325,000 tons, or 294,000 metric tons, of heavy material into a single gorge. Let us apply the wagon equation to the rail lines. A standard 1870s flatbed rail car could carry approximately 10 tons of rock. To transport 325,000 tons requires 32,500 fully loaded train cars. Now, let us expose the ultimate paradox of the official ledger. They claimed the bridge was too weak to support commercial freight. Yet to execute the trench fill, they repeatedly drove 32,500 heavily loaded rock trains directly over the very structure they just classified as structurally failing. The official narrative mathematically contradicts its own load-bearing parameters. Moving 1/3 of a million tons of rock is exponentially more expensive and labor-intensive than simply sending a crew of men to disassemble a wooden scaffold. You do not spend millions of dollars to bury a bridge unless you are desperately trying to hide it.
If the goal was simply to replace a weak bridge, why not tear it down? Why execute the burial protocol? Because dismantling a high-tech structural matrix requires the exact same advanced mechanized equipment required to build it. Let us audit the physics of deconstruction. The Secret Town Trestle was an interlocking matrix of immense pressure and tension. The massive weight of the timber creates stored kinetic energy. If you attempt to safely deconstruct a high-tension, multi-tiered structural grid using men with handsaws, you invite mass casualties. The moment unmechanized laborers sever the primary load-bearing joints or remove the critical tension rods, the stored kinetic energy releases violently. The massive timbers buckle, twist, and snap, causing the entire 90-foot structure to collapse inward on itself in a catastrophic cascade. To safely dismantle a heavy load matrix, you require massive hydraulic cranes to hold the multi-ton timbers from above, taking the weight off the joints while the bolts are slowly extracted. But if the Secret Town Trestle was assembled using hidden heavy industrial Phase 2 technology, that technology was strictly quarantined by the 1870s.
The robber barons were trapped in a technological paradox. They possessed a monumental structure they claimed they had built by hand, but they lacked the public-facing technological capacity to safely take it apart in front of the press and independent surveyors without exposing the fraud. If they tried to tear it down with ropes and pulleys, it would collapse, proving they never could have built it that way in the first place. Furthermore, dismantling the bridge would leave the massive iron bolts, the complex joinery, and the advanced anti-vibration bearing plates sitting on the ground for public inspection. It would expose the metallurgical and geometric truth. The corporate monopolies chose the only viable cover-up. They entombed it. Furthermore, critics will argue that burying wood is foolish because it will eventually rot and cause the earthen mound to collapse, but this reveals a lack of understanding of soil mechanics. When you bury massive timbers under millions of tons of densely compacted crushed rock and clay, you force out all the oxygen. You create a deeply pressurized anaerobic environment. Without oxygen, wood does not rot. It is preserved. It becomes fossilized. The Central Pacific did not just bury the bridge, they deliberately entombed it in an oxygen-free vault to ensure the evidence survived, but remained entirely inaccessible.
This brings us back to the mountains of California. Today, modern high-speed freight trains still travel over the exact coordinates of Secret Town. But they do not cross a bridge. They roll over a massive, silent, artificial hill. Deep inside that hill, sealed in a lightless, airless vacuum, under hundreds of thousands of tons of crushed rock, sits the original Secret Town Trestle. It is fossilized, a perfectly preserved skeleton of an impossible industrial era, locked away from any independent forensic analysis or ground-penetrating radar. The official narrative tells us that the robber barons conquered the West through the sweat and blood of an unmechanized workforce. They sell us the romance of the golden spike and the iron shovel. But the physical evidence dictates a much darker reality. The Gilded Age cartels did not just monopolize wealth and railroads. They monopolized timelines. They executed a massive infrastructural takeover, utilizing suppressed Phase 2 mechanization that they wiped from the public ledger. And when an architectural anomaly became a liability, when a structure stood as undeniable proof that the primitive tools of the era could not match the perfection of the infrastructure, they did not rewrite the history books. They simply buried the evidence. To our current auditors and new viewers joining the ledger, thank you for your continued focus. Hit subscribe to titanmetrics and leave your localized architectural anomalies in the comments below for future deployment. Trust the numbers, not the narrative. The ledger remains open.